We'll need to work out exactly how we'll cooperate, but we're welcome to exploring it with you. Yeah, so I guess last words. Business and civil society have such large ways to cooperate. We have a lot of common ground, and I hope that we can all turn our creativity and all of our innovative energies towards finding those spaces so that we can all push forward the advocacies that are important to us as business and as civil society.
Thank you, Catch. Tauki?
That was a great start that Catch gave to this, and you're absolutely right. I think we're all in a learning process. Even individually, we've all learned something from COVID. Mm-hmm. Things are being done differently. We're all charting new paths to follow. I think in terms about the question between the model that you were talking about, currently, at least in my country, you have it being practiced in the sense that you have non-government organizations setting up in a way that they have a revenue generating or activity or arm or project or subsidiary because they need the financial resources to do what they need to do in their civil engagements. And then they have the whole part around governance. Whether it's a model that would appeal to private sector, I'm not sure, because private sector is really, really about business. I mean, now the world is pushing a lot around CSR and what you're giving back to community, what you're doing about your environment, what you're doing about labor. So I think it's a conversation that we need to push forward on. In terms of legislation, honestly, not everything can be legislated. You really do need common agreement and a common push towards certain objectives. Otherwise, we would all have been legislated into doing all kinds of things. So I think in terms of the human rights is embedded in a lot of our various laws. It's not all in one document. You have bills of rights depending on whether you're looking at labor, business sectors. And I think it's just a common conversation. We have to have a vision as people, as nations, as sectors of society on how we pursue the common good is what we're thinking about. And I think in terms of last words, I think this is the beginning. I think we all should be leaving this conference further motivated and determined to find more areas of collaboration and agreement. I mean, that's how I feel. And begin to, walk that talk. And there's it's a no-brainer that private sector and CSO should and must collaborate if we want to achieve scale, if we want to achieve impact, if we want to achieve reach. I think those are my last words. Thank you, Kathy.
That's great. Last word. Uni?
I just want to comment on the model of corporations where, the financial part and the other parts are separate. I'm not sure that's manageable, which also means that the other parts will always go haywire, do whatever they like, right? And the other one, then turn into NGO instead of changing things within. I'm not sure how does that work. At the end of the day, the responsibilities of governance, performance of a company, I think it stays on the board and shareholders. And shareholders, actually, well, if many of you owning shares here, it's our responsibility to ensure that our investment actually go to the right thing. Companies going somewhere, it's their company, but we are as shareholders have also right to determine where the directions of this company going. So I think it's important, that's why growing the business to be big and become publicly listed and they subject to greater discipline is very important. Because when you're small, usually SMEs, at least in the case of Malaysia, they don't really subject to many disciplines. They don't publish annual report. We don't know what's happening, being used for political reasons. But if they are publicly listed, they become bigger. Of course, not all companies meant to be big, but the likelihood of them subjected to greater disciplines, even on human rights, is greater. And I think it's the obligation of shareholders to actually ensure that. On human rights, I think I agree with Tauki. As much as we want to have a very uniform standard to subject companies. At the end of the day, UN declarations of human rights, for example, is subject to countries, not companies. But these principles can be adopted in any standards that countries can create it. I mean, EITI, for example, cost. I believe those standards on extractive industries, on construction industry, incorporate some of the human rights ideas. I mean, in Malaysia, palm oil is a controversial, and we are working with one of them, Sime Darby. And palm oil in Malaysia is no secret. They have foreign labor problem. They subject their labors to very low standards, and there's a Tough Glove, for example. It's very important business in Malaysia. They have really good anti-corruption, but at the same time, they also have lower standard. But I think, in our opinion, if we start making them enemies, the conversation will not go anywhere. So I believe, I think I like Toki's point, is engagement. Maybe we come to engage from different sectors or from different issues. Say, for example, in the case of Sime Darby, we come from Orang Asli. But it is also possible through this long engagement that we can communicate the importance of including human rights principles in this. It's a long journey. It will not happen in 1 or 2 years. But I think that's what it takes for a change to happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Uni. Wojciech?
Sorry, it's taking a long time for you.
No. Thank you. I think I have little to add, but I'll start where Toki mentioned that this cooperation is no-brainer. And I would add, yes, and we should not take it for granted. It's something to be earned and to be fought for. It takes time and effort, especially when governments don't provide a framework for that cooperation. And that is still so needed. And I think businesses are becoming aware of that, especially those that have agency, referring to the last question. The businesses that get engaged and how they get engaged are the businesses that feel they have some agency. That usually comes with, more naturally, with being placed, being kind of grown out of the place where they operate, rather than being these multinational or dislocated companies. There is, of course, an answer to that, how to get the multinational, big companies, very successful companies engaged, and there are the frameworks of human rights, but I think companies prefer something more specific, and today we didn't mention the ESG or ESGT even discussion on environments, society, governance, and technology as aspects of the business's responsibility for the environment they co-create. And my last point, probably not answering all the questions, but they've been addressed already by my fantastic co-panelists, is that business needs some rules, not too many rules, but business needs rules, needs framework in which they can plan, operate, and thrive. And interestingly enough, I think they're now seeing, more often than not, a civil society are the guardians and fighters for the rules. And making this alliance or making this transgression sometimes creates the greatest and the utmost outputs that were never expected before. And I think these cases that we've been providing, including the one in which collaboration happens with businesses and civil society in the refugee response in Poland and Central Europe, but also so many others, provide testimony to that there is a space to explore, not taken for granted, but absolutely no-brainer. Thank you.
Thank you, Wojciech. I think today's panelists all share great insights about how to work together with civil society organizations. And I think this goes back to kind of the very beginning of what CIPE stands for, or what democracy organization stands for. It's to make democracy delivers. So to make democracy delivers, you need the private sector's participation into the whole process. And a functional market economy then reinforce and solidify democracy. So then they're intertwined. It's a symbiotic relationship. And I think as a true believer of that, growing up in Taiwan, I think Taiwan is a successful example of that, and as many examples that panelists have shared today. And so I left inspired by all the great works that the panelists have shared. But I think we also highlighted a few kind of entry point for us to start the conversation, to start the engagement. Then we can then form the collaboration later on. So I think as the Dhaka Assembly indicated or discussed, that the cross-sectoral engagement and collaboration really is key to advance democracy around the world. And that's why we are all here talking about this particular issue. And so, and I really appreciate all the questions from the audience. So SIPE is here, our panelists are here. So if after the forum, you would like to discuss, brainstorm, find ways to collaborate and to really do more together, to join forces and to really fight for democracy around the world, we're happy, to really work with you anywhere. So fighting for democracy, right? So that's why we're all here. So thank you all very much for joining us today for the great discussion. And thank you again for the panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alia Ibrahim. I am co-founder of a Beirut-based independent media named Daraj. When 5 years ago, my co-founders and myself decided to launch this media owned by journalists addressing Arabic speakers around the world, we were told by everybody we knew that we were completely crazy. This was the moment when the Arab Spring had derailed completely. It had turned into the nightmare it had become in Syria and Libya and Yemen and Egypt. And for us, it was the moment where, as journalists, we were feeling we not only were not part of the solution, we were part of the problem. And that problem was not in the non-existence of journalists or journalism, that believes in the fundamentals of holding power into account, of giving voice for marginalized groups. It was in the ownership of the media. So the solution for us was very simple, just work on media owned by journalists. And when people told us we were crazy, we looked for examples, and examples existed. Mediapart and the correspondents were already there. But it was really Rappler that for us was an incredible inspiration and an incredible validation for our then project. It was there, it was already doing what we wanted to do on the other side of the planet, and it gave us the justification. So I'm saying all this to say how important it is for me to be here today with a personal hero and a personal role model and an inspiration. And it's really very genuine. So thank you to anyone who made that possible. And we have so much to discuss today, just in now a little bit less than 30 minutes. So Maria, thank you for being here. It's a great opportunity to be having this conversation here in Taiwan and with everything that is happening around us. Let's go into it. Yesterday you said we're in the last 20 minutes of democracy. And previously you said then atomic bomb has hit our information ecosystem. Where do we take it from there? How do we defend journalism? How do we defend this industry we love so much and push back against everything that's happening?
I mean, on all fronts, right? And it's the last 2 minutes. You guys play basketball? Last 2 minutes, and we are losing this game of democracy. So, I mean, part of what we've tried to do in Rappler, first of all, thank you so much. The person who did a lot of the research for us, our head of research, Gemma Mendoza, is also here. So, I mean, it's like throwing spaghetti against the wall. You know this. If you're a startup founder, if you're trying to reinvent what civic engagement looks like, what journalism looks like in the age of exponential lies, your question is, so what do we do, right? I mean, let me go directly to what do we do. Yesterday, I talked about, right before Ann Applebaum told you what the real world looks like, right? How geopolitical power play has shifted to networks. I mean, Belarus, for example, would Belarus be a democracy today if Russia hadn't come in? Yes. Would other countries that are on the verge tip towards democracy or autocracy Inc.? Well, it's still power and money. So countries like the Philippines, which is in between, countries in the global south, which are trying to make it work. I mean, it's so interesting what's going on in your country and your own reporting, right? What a long preamble. Why don't I just show you what did work for us? And I'm gonna fast forward through a bunch of this stuff, right? Because in the end, this is what I had actually said. So first of all, let's just go back to this, right? This is the way information operations work. And let's put it in the United States before we bring it back home, because if you are on social media and you're working in a democracy that is slowly tipping, this is happening to you. This is from the Election Integrity Partnership, where you can see how disinformation is seeded and then how it comes bottom up, a lie a million times, and then comes top down. This is Stop the Steal. This is election fraud. This is happening in Brazil now. And you can look at what the Election Integrity Partnership saw when they looked at the data. We stick to evidence-based, fact-based. You actually see that Stop the Steal was seeded a year earlier in August 2019, not surprisingly, in RT. And then the mainstreaming began here. Again, is it a surprise? It was on Steve Bannon on YouTube. The mainstreaming then here, we saw Tucker Carlson bring it out to the super spreaders, QAnon. And then finally, so it comes up this way and then comes top down with then former President Trump saying the same thing and calling people out. And that is what we saw happen. Right? So so the last 2 minutes that I talked about at the beginning yesterday was really to take what Anne is telling us is happening in the physical world and show you what has happened in the virtual world. And the main problem is that the technology that supposedly connects us, at the time when journalists owned distribution, this could never have happened because we were liable, legally liable, for protecting the public sphere. Now, no one is legally liable for protecting this public sphere. And what is the problem? That our minds what we think of the world is being insidiously manipulated through our emotions. That's how come social media is now a weapon for information warfare. We talked about this. I mean, Taiwan knows this. Ukraine certainly knows this in 2014. Ukraine started sounding the alarm. The Philippines started sounding the alarm. We tend to always be the testing ground. If the United States is under attack, it comes first through the Philippines. It's now a behavior modification system. You say a lie 1,000,000 times. It's not a free speech issue, right? Because free speech, pounding you to silence. We've had both of these attacks happen to us, and the end goal, like with Crimea, like with Ukraine, is to suppress and then replace. So three-step process: suppress, replace, and then mainstream, right? So what are the 3 layers? World War III today is happening, not just the conventional warfare that is happening in Ukraine, that is happening, that Taiwan oftentimes prepares for, but it is also an individual war, an individual battle for the truth in each of our minds. That is where this modern war is being fought. So it is first personal, it's the impact on you psychologically. This stuff is mildly addictive, increased levels of dopamine when you're on it, and the end goal is to keep you scrolling. But when your mind changes, when we are in groups, it becomes sociological. And then the big thing, we've never had 3.2 billion in one platform. Emergent human behavior with an incentive structure that rewards the liar, that rewards the lies over the truth teller. That's the first part. The second part, why is it the last 2 minutes in this democracy? Because if you don't have integrity of facts, you don't have integrity of elections, right? If you don't know the facts, how are you going to vote for the right person? How are you going to choose? Where is agency? And that's where we are already. We're already at the tail end. And yesterday I laid out the elections that are there. Some of you guys tweeted, please use hashtag WM11Assembly. But you tweeted your own elections coming up. So this shift is happening already. It is individual. I'm telling you the problem again. Let me spin through all of this stuff. If you want data, go to my Twitter feed, because I actually punched out a bunch of data with the hashtag so you can see it. This is the way we began to fight it in Rappler, and it'll be interesting to hear also about Daraj.com. It's a dual funnel. Just like Anne Applebaum told you about the physical world, there is also a virtual world. We only live in one world, and the fact that we have rule of law in the physical world, but no rule of law, impunity in the virtual world, it is what has caused the erosion of rule of law. But for Rappler, we took it as a dual funnel, right? There's the digital funnel, and then there's the physical civic engagement funnel, and we can talk about that more. This is what we wound up doing. It worked. This is our MVP, not most valuable player, but minimum viable product that I want to push, I want to encourage our movement to look at, and perhaps to set up at a global landscape. Only 3 months in operation, a 4-layer pyramid that is a whole of society approach. It starts with 16 news groups. We've never all worked together like this in the Philippines because competition always got in the way. Well, we did here, and it was a Creative Commons license, so anyone can publish it. And we also had a data layer that went through all of it. Midan, if you're a fact checker, you know that this is a data platform. So every one of the 16, like every one of you in the room, tells your followers, tells your community, you know, tell us if you see any lies that you want fact check, send it here. And when it's sent to that first layer, everyone sees it all the way up to the top layer. And then we meta tag it, right? Then the fact checks go out. Let's say each news group does 30 fact checks a month. That's the supply. The second layer is called the mesh. And this is our way of fighting back now, because legislation doesn't really kick in until spring 2023, and then education is like the next generation already coming up. So now the mesh layer is about more than 100 civil society groups, NGOs, business. For the first time, business came in. Oh my God, I cannot begin to tell you how long it took us to work on that. And then the big thing is the church. And what is the mesh supposed to do? To take those very boring fact checks, because they never spread on social media, and share them with emotion, with a very specific ask from all of us to stay away from anger and hate. And guess, like with Ukraine, like with people who inspire you, inspiration spread as far as anger, hate, and fear, right? So that's the mesh. And then the third layer was research. 8 research groups with the data that we had, and every week they came out with like a webinar that showed you this is who is what is the meta-narrative that's being pushed into the public sphere, who is being targeted, who is gaining. It was always inevitably the opposition leader, the vice president, a woman, Leni Robredo, was always targeted, in fact, since 2016, and who was winning? Marcos. It was very, very interesting. And then finally, but we took it cross-platform, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, all the way across, because when you have more than one working together with the same data set, you can actually go through. And the last one, layer 4, was the most important one, and they were the most adamant. They were also the most energized because they hadn't really been fighting for the last 6 or 7 years like the journalists were. The law. The legal groups, law firms, the Philippine Bar Association, the Integrated Bar of the Philippines. In fact, let me show you what that looks up. Sorry, I didn't actually put it in. So that law firm, all the law firms filed actually they filed more than 21 tactical and strategic cases in less than 3 months. Movement against disinformation, set up by lawyers. It was incredible to try to bring back rule of law. This is the impact. We know it worked. Well, within the first 2 weeks of doing this pyramid, it's called the Facts First PH pyramid, and I did the same thing that I'm doing to you. It's like, it is it. This is the last 2 minutes. It's an Avengers Assemble moment, right? You have to take all your superpowers, and we did. So look at that. On the left here, this is the main network of the news organizations, but then you put that here, and then you can see the ripple effect. We mapped the impact. And we've been doing this since 2016, and we have never been able to reclaim the center of our information ecosystem in the Philippines. We did this time. And the first inkling we knew that it was successful was within the first 2 weeks that we rolled it out, the Philippine government, the Office of the Solicitor General, filed a petition at the Supreme Court against Rappler and the Commission on Elections, saying that fact-checking is prior restraint. You're laughing. It is laughable, right? But thankfully, the Supreme Court didn't do anything, and we would have kept doing it. Would you have let, prior restraint on fact-checking stop you? What does that do, right? These were I'll just end with these last 2 slides, which is the mesh layer, right? They did things like this. They took what the journalists did, and they made it accessible. We're kind of boring. We're grim and determined oftentimes, right? But look at what they did. Cartoons, artwork, TikTok explainers. I am not on TikTok, but Rappler is. So is these 2 are influencers in their own way. One is a mother who looks at history. And then the newspapers, our other partners, actually did weekend full-page spreads of fact checks, and their circulation increased. And there was even a billboard. And finally, this is the last thing, we reversed the research. Because normally, research on disinformation takes forever. By the time it comes out, it's like a weapons race, arms race, right? By the time it comes out, it's too late. What we did is we asked them, because they were coming up with the data, we asked them to first publish it before they submit it for peer review. So 2 of these 21 research reports only 1 has come out after peer review, but they all came out in time for our election. So it is from the bottom up, emotions, intellect, law. That's our whole of society approach.
But Maria, you raised so many amazing topics that I would like to ask you about.
Sure.
But let's stress on one thing. You did this amazing initiative. At the end of the day, it's a game of time also, and the
Yes.
president won.
Yes.
We always seems to be 5 steps behind.
Yes.
And here there are 2 main issues. I think that it's brilliant that this retelling stories in as many formats as possible to reach as wider audiences as possible is incredibly good. But bad news and fake news still flies faster. And
Yes.
we know that through data.
By
and
design.
algorithms.
By design.
So what do we do like when we're in this ecosystem and we're trying to work on the journalism? And I think one point that needs to be raised here, when you as Rappler, as a journalistic priority, when journalism is your priority, when you're working so much with civil society, where do you draw the line?
Oh, I
Where do
love your
we-
question.
Where do we really stick to the journalism and make sure that even our partners are being held accountable?
We always draw the line, and I think that's the difference. The standards and ethics manuals of journalism are very clear, right? So we had a whole discussion about this, but let me quickly say what it is. I no longer have an editorial position in Rappler when I came under attack, because at some point, I had 10 arrest warrants in less than 2 years. Right? This is my 36th year as a journalist, and I have worked for, I spent almost 20 years with CNN International at the golden age of journalism, and then headed the largest network in the Philippines, and then we started Rappler. I could never have thought we would be where we are today. So how do you draw the line? I no longer, after the first time I was arrested, and they made a point to actually, I remember the date, February 13th, 2019, because it was Valentine's Day the next day. So it was my government's gift to me. They made sure to arrest me at 5 o'clock so that this way I couldn't post bail. I knew, because worst case scenario, that there was a municipal court that was open until 9 o'clock, but they delayed it, so I was detained overnight. And when I came out the next morning and I was forced to, the arrest warrant didn't even have an amount for bail. That's how much it was rushed. So the next morning, I was furious, but when you're furious, that's when you smile. So I was furious, and that's when I realized that the pettiness of the way this will work, that they will bend it to the point that it's broken, and it's quite petty. So that's when I realized that I'm not just a journalist, I'm a citizen. And I am a citizen who is being targeted, and I was going to hold my government to account. To answer your question, how do you draw the line? I do tech, data. I take care of our business. The editorial is completely separate. For me, in terms of our civic engagement, this goes all the way to the beginning of Rappler in 2012. We actually, instead of marketing, I didn't put in a marketing budget. What I did was create a civic engagement arm, which is separate from the editorial team. That civic engagement arm works with government.
And they're completely separated?
They're separate from us. They run campaigns with government. So for example, some of the wonderful things we did was, climate change. The Philippines, starting in 2013, is the 3rd most disaster-prone country in the world. So we worked very closely. We worked closely with our Department of Social Welfare and Development in terms of trying to stop stunting hunger. We called it the Hunger Project. We did one step better than India's IPaidAbribe.com by working with our Commission on Audit, and we did a crowdfunding of report bribery, right? Because the government itself said, our COA, Commission on Audit, actually said that only 20% of the bribes are reported. So we opened a portal, we built a portal, and then when they reported, it was the government who responded to them. We enabled government. This is our civic engagement arm. Mm-hmm. So I paid a bribe, you just report it, but you don't close the loop on government acting on it. And for a period of time until the Duterte administration came into power, we were doing bottom-up anti-corruption campaigns. This is the civic engagement arm again. Okay, while that is happening, and I'll give you a perfect example, Super Typhoon Haiyan, which is the way the global community knows it, but for us it was Typhoon Yolanda. In Typhoon Yolanda, one of our Move PH is the civic engagement arms. One of our partner was the Secretary of Social Welfare and Development, Dinky Soliman. So she goes to the hardest hit area. And she's there, right? Our Move PH actually sits in the crisis team because we created a panel where people can crowd report any kinds of problems they have in a typhoon. So she goes, but then we have our reporter there. And I don't think this is necessarily a point of pride, but our reporter asks such tough questions that Move PH's partner, the secretary, cried. I mean, and they were normal questions, right? When we were there, this was in Leyte, where the eye of the storm was, Rappler had a satellite, an IP satellite van, but no one else brought satellite phones. I mean, how do you not do that in the middle of a typhoon? So that's the separation. There's a separate group that worked with government, that organizes civil society. The way I thought about it before was that Rappler builds communities of action. The food we feed our communities is journalism, so it is fact-based, evidence-based, and
But let
they
me
act
stop
on
you
it.
here, Maria. Today we are looking at crisis across the globe, and as
Yes.
journalism, we are faced with this crisis of reporting today between Ukraine, Iran, what's happening. In that context, where do we draw the line? How do we answer to the pushback when it comes to sticking to journalism in conflict zones?
I mean, first of all, whose definition of journalism? This idea, so I have a book coming out in November, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, right? I stand for human rights. I stand for press freedom. As a journalist, these are not things that I throw out. And this idea of faux objectivity, even when I was with CNN, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I was used to think, hello, no one is objective. I'm a 5'2" Filipino American. That's the way I will analyze the world. But what is objective is the process of journalism where the reporter has an editor, the editor has a managing editor, and then if it is a particularly sensitive story, you have legal go over it, right? So it is the system of news groups that is frankly quite expensive that technology platforms don't have. But you know what? I'm fascinated because you've lived through some tough experiences. You should tell them why this whole idea of drawing the line is also important to you.
Well, we were talking about this, and yes, I am particularly passionate about this because because I covered Syria.
Yes, go.
And in Syria, when I did my job, and my position on Syria was 100% very, very clear against the dictator. But when I was covering on the ground, and it was 2013, beginning of Jabhat al-Nusra, Daesh did not exist yet, but you could see where things were going. And I reported on what I saw. And I ended up getting out of Syria. Even being with armed militias, I did not feel scared. I felt scared because the social media context got me out of Syria with a fatwa to kill me because I was accused of being against the revolution and against what was happening there. People who were journalists and writers, etc., told me this was not the time to be critical or to say what I was saying. And I raise this point now because really I think we're facing the same issues today.
And the way, go.
There is the journalism, and there is where we stand morally and of course politically.
Well,
but the journalism sticking to the reporting.
And I will respond to this exactly the way I responded to it when we talked, which is that in the end, the journalist in any conflict must report the facts. That is why this is a battle for facts. And you reported the facts, and it was actually the people who believed the same things you did that attacked you, right? And then where did the attacks happen? On social media, right? So let me take that apart. So the first thing is, as a reporter in a conflict zone, regardless of what you think, you report what you see, right? That is why you go to these conflict zones. That's first. Regardless of what you think, the way other people interpret it, frankly, is not our problem.
But the narratives are being set.
Oh yeah, but that goes back to the basic problem of social media, right? What spreads fastest? Fear, anger, hate. Who are attacked the most? Women in the Philippines, starting in 2017, this is data, were attacked at least 10 times more than men.
Yeah.
Because They wanted to stop your reporting. So what did they do? They attacked you. Was it information operations? If it was Syria, maybe, most likely we would have to look at the data. But that is different from how we do our jobs, what we do, regardless of what we believe, right? So my equivalent in the Philippines was, Rappler was was the first organization to give then Mayor Duterte a nationwide stage. We live streamed all 5. There were 5 candidates for president. He attended our presidential debate. And the people who campaigned against Duterte after he won then blamed Rappler for his win. That's biases in the eye of the beholder. You know, what we did was we were fair, because that is fairness, that is part of the Standards and Ethics Manual. We are transparent about our standards and ethics manuals, about our values. We align with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, with the Philippine Constitution, and we hold those lines. So for others to feel that's an opinion, they can have it. In the old days, when news organizations were in charge of the public sphere, our organizations can get in front of it, and a lie couldn't spread 1,000,000 times to become a fact. Right? So the dangers, I mean, look, the president of Taiwan shared a photo of of all of us coming together to meet her, right? And then I just saw all the attacks against her, including her head being placed on a woman in a bikini, right? Like very salacious, misogynistic things. Why is this legal? Why, sorry, now I sound like that, right? But I'm just saying this happens to every reporter and every woman politician. If you're LGBTQ, if you were marginalized before in the real world, these attacks get worse in the virtual world.
We don't have much time left, but you worked for CNN.
Yes.
And now you champion for independent media. Distribution is much easier for mainstream, and getting the message through is much easier for mainstream. Why do you think independent media, in this very noisy world, with the technology and algorithms and distribution challenges, why do you think, why Rappler was your choice?
And this is why I also co-chair the International Fund for Public Interest Media, which is to try to get democratic countries to increase 0.3% of ODA to 1% so that we can give it to independent media. My co-chair is the former Director General of the BBC and the former president of the New York Times. Okay, so there are 2 reasons why, and I see that we have 15 seconds left. Reason number 1 is that independent media doesn't have other ownership. So you just saw the one with business and civil society. Well, businesses, corporate media tends to have a lot more interest. Not to say that you're not independent corporate media. I came from corporate media, but independent media, young, scrappy. Like, why did Rappler stand up? We have no other businesses. We have no other interests to protect. And before we came out with our weaponization of the internet series, I actually asked for board approval because it was exposing something that was insidiously manipulating us behind the scenes. The second thing is, corporate media moves too slowly, and this is why we need to move faster. When I was managing ABS-CBN, which is the largest network in the Philippines, largest news organization, about 1,000 journalists, and it would take, from idea to execution, 6 months is fast. You know that, 6 months is fast. In Rappler, 1 week, idea to execution. So you can try a lot of things, and that's part of what we need to do in this day and age where, frankly, it's not just independent journalism or journalism under attack. Oh, by the way, did we mention that these very same platforms have killed the business model of journalism, right? Advertising is dead, and we must find another sustainable business model. And this kind of thing where you have autocracy Inc., and then you have the manipulation of our emotions and minds, we're just the punching bag. And this is part of the reason we need civil society. We cannot do this without you.
Well, I want to end on a happy...
we must end happy.
So we are taking more time, but the last 2 minutes, how far are we from losing or winning? in the game. So make it optimistic. Are we going to win?
It depends on you. We are certainly doing all we can. I'm willing, I could go to jail for the rest of my life. You have to ask yourself the question, what are you willing to sacrifice? Because this time is when you can be a force for good, and silence or apathy becomes a force for evil. How's that? Does it work? Please act. We must do something. Oh yeah, we're live streaming this. You too. You must also act. You gotta ask yourself. We're in the last 2 minutes. And I think the journalists have done our jobs.
Well, we keep doing
We
our
keep
job.
trying, but it's almost like we're just putting our finger in the dam and it's about to collapse. Citizens must step up, and we have to stop being what the tech companies call users or consumers. We must demand integrity of information. I feel bad for governments. They can't govern if you do not have integrity of facts. So let's demand it.
Well, I'll end on that. Thank you so much. Where I'm standing, despite as bleak as the situation is in the Middle East, we're still doing what we can, and it's not game over yet.
Not at all.
So
Not at all.
thank you very much. This has been a fantastic opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Alia. When you are listening to very interesting conversation, time flies. I didn't think it was only 30 minutes, but now it's time for coffee break. And after that, I'd like you to join different workshops that you sign up for. How do you find out where the workshops are? Check the apps. So thank you very much, and see you in the workshop.